This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by OWC, Whisper Room, Eventide Audio, Spectra 1964, and Roswell Pro Audio. So get ready to rock.
So much music now is made within a computer, whether it's programmed or whatever. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I feel like a little bit of what I like to do is just sort of the antithesis to that. I like when you can hear that it's a person in a chair playing an acoustic guitar and singing, or it's a person playing bells, like not perfectly. I like the humanness of it.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. This episode is sponsored by OWC, Otherworld Computing, which you can find at OWC.com, your trusted source for memory and speed upgrades, DIY installs, and used Macs for your studio. Let OWC focus on keeping your studio Mac in killer condition so that you can focus on making great music. Why ditch your existing Mac when you can take your studio far into the future with OWC? Learn more at OWC.com and learn how you can supercharge your studio Mac. The speed to create, the capacity to dream. Find out how awesome your Mac can be at OWC. The Spectra 1964 101 amplifier provides unequaled headroom, low noise, and a linear output, irrespective of transient audio peaks. In the studio, this means that critical details from your microphone get through to your DAW. The 101 was used by Tom Dowd, Muscle Shoals, Stax Studios, and The Record Plant on records by ZZ Top, Aerosmith, Bruce Springsteen, and John Lennon. Today, Spectra 1964 brings that same incredible sound to your studio with the STX 100 mic pre. Learn more at Spectra1964.com. What do Michael Brower, Joe Ciccarelli, Dave Pensato, and George Massenburg all have in common? They all have great things to say about Eventide. Originating in a New York City basement in 1971 with the original Instant Phaser and H910 harmonizer, Eventide continues to transform the sound of music with the iconic H9000 harmonizer, visionary guitar effects like the H9 pedal, and now a whole suite of incredible plugins for your studio. Go to eventide.com to learn more or click the link in the show notes below. If you're sick of bothering the neighbors when you are trying to record your music or ruining your recordings with outside noises, but you're not ready to spend a ton of money on permanent studio construction yet, then consider getting a Whisper Room ISO booth for your studio. Whisper Room offers the instant solution for a comfortable, quiet, ventilated, portable ISO booth with easy line of sight for recording vocals, guitar amps, or even drums. Get 10% off the 4x4 or 4x6 booth when you mention Recording Studio Rockstars. Go to whisperroom.com or click the link in the show notes below. Hey Rockstars, it's your host Lid Shaw, and welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Alan Parker, a recording engineer originally from Atlanta, Georgia, now in Nashville, Tennessee, managing Easy Eye Sound, working closely with artist and producer Dan Auerbach of the Black Keys. Alan grew up playing both drums and percussion in classical ensembles and rock bands before getting his degree in music business and production at Belmont University, followed by becoming a staff engineer at Ocean Way Nashville for several years, where he quickly developed professional and personal relationships with many of Music City's finest musicians, engineers, and producers like Dan Auerbach, Joyce, Ross Copperman, and mentor Ben Fowler. For the last decade, he's devoted himself to freelance work and now works in numerous Nashville studios. Since January of 2016, Alan has been chief engineer and studio manager at Easy Eye Sound, a Nashville-based studio owned by Dan. Alan's client list includes the likes of Dan Auerbach, Dierks Bentley, Joe Walsh, Yola, Blake Shelton, Robert Finley, and many other cool artists. Super excited to talking about making these records with Alan. I've got a playlist of his work in the show notes. You can just click through and go listen to that on YouTube. Check some of this stuff out. It's some of the best stuff that's come across the podcast here. Please welcome Alan Parker to Recording Studio Rockstars. Alan, are you ready to rock?
I am. Thank you.
Welcome to the show, dude.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Nice to have you here, man. You're this is the first time we've met in person.
Yeah.
And you're just, you're very like pleasant, sort of mild-mannered.
Well, this is a low stress environment.
Low stress. All right.
Yeah.
I was just wondering. It made me wonder if you sort of do you get worked up in the studio on sessions?
I get focused. I would say more. Yeah. I don't want to say worked up. That implies a lack of control. But I don't know. Particularly at stuff at Dan's, I don't really have like a assistant engineer. It's pretty much me.
Yeah,
running Pro Tools, moving mics, doing all that kind of stuff. So if we've
what about my man Alex Shelton, who was an intern here?
Alex was great, but even the way that the studio's designed, my keyboard and monitor is sort of like right on the console.
Yeah.
So it's a little hard for somebody else to be doing much. I can, if something's broken, I can say, hey, go check that out.
Yeah.
But a lot of times by the time I get done explaining it, I could be out there. So if there's 7 or 8 guys on the floor, I can be, I guess, worked up. It can happen.
But, it's actually, you bring up a good point because I wonder if assisting and interning has really changed since it started out. So when I started, an assistant was really, they were up and hustling around the control room, patching things in, plugging stuff up, taking furious notes on paper. And now we live in a day of computers, and it's like, I feel bad for interns here sometimes where it's like, feel free to just come hover over my shoulder and stare at the computer screen. Sometimes I'll be writing an email and sometimes I'll be editing music,
No, it's definitely changed. And I was thinking about that when I was thinking through some of what we were going to talk about today, because a lot of my stories, I guess, about, different points in my career are from a time where, one of the stories in particular, I was assisting on a mix session for like 2 weeks at a commercial studio. It's like, that doesn't happen anymore. There's a little bit of that maybe in LA, and like Tom Elmhurst does that in New York, but like in Nashville, there's not too many times when somebody goes to Ocean Way or Blackbird for 2 weeks to mix a song a day in a studio with an assistant,
It's more the tracking situations.
Yeah, there's tracking, and so many guys have great mix setups at home, or if they're mixing in a commercial room, it's really just for the speakers. They're not doing using a lot of outboard gear and stuff. It's definitely changed, and I know I learned a lot when I was assisting. So I know it's got to be a little bit different world to navigate if you're just getting started.
Yeah.
And also it's, that's sort of how I survived financially for a while. Cause I was engineering stuff, but I wasn't making any money as a first engineer. I was making money as an assistant.
Yeah.
And then firsting when I had time. And so, one of my interns at Dan's studio right now, he's got a full-time job otherwise, and he's there, 3 days a week when he can be, but he's paying the bills doing not music.
That's assistant or intern?
He's sort of hybrid.
Yeah. Right. Sort of. Have you seen people who are just at that starting stage? Have you seen them take on jobs where you're like, that kind of job to a company trying to be in the studio works great, and this one seems to conflict with trying to work in the studio?
Yes. I guess there's sort of two different philosophies. One is flexibility, and it's nice if you have a job that's just money, where if you get called about a good gig, you can always get out of it.
Yeah.
The other side is something that's a little bit more complimentary. I know several guys who have done like IT stuff or like more computer-based things, which that's a helpful background in the modern recording world,
Yeah.
So I think it just depends on the person and how available they want and need to be.
Yeah. I remember feeling like when I started out, I never took on a steady job anywhere. Actually, delivering pizzas was the last thing I ever did that wasn't music related, you know. But it was like not taking a steady job somewhere and not never joining like a sports team or anything that met regularly, because I was just like, I can never really commit to anything other than just being available for the studio.
I was fortunate when I was just starting to assist more and still firsting some and stuff early in my career. The one sort of outside job that I had was I ran live sound at the Bluebird for a little while, which ended up being like a really, I mean, it wasn't at all what I wanted to do, because it's like one acoustic guitar and one vocal, or, 3 acoustic guitars and 3 vocals. It's taking turns, but wasn't recording, and I never wanted to be a live sound guy. But it was fortunate because I got to meet some songwriters and some different people, because, it was sort of loosely tied to my business, so I ended up meeting some people who would hire me to cut demos and do stuff in the studio that I met just, basically unmuting a vocal mic. So I don't know. I mean, I think depending on the city you're in, there might be opportunities like that where you can be connecting with people who are doing music stuff, even if that's not how you're meeting.
Yeah, I agree. I sort of encourage people to consider, if you're going to get a job in a coffee shop or something, don't do it in, over at the mall.
Yeah, sure.
Do it in the area where people are making music and where the musicians go, because you do run into people.
Yeah.
I remember feeling also like the coffee shop was like the great forum for finding work or something for a long time too, for me.
It's amazing how many times you see somebody in certain parts of town, how many times you see somebody, and it's like, hey, what you been working on, or what's up,
Yeah, and it's like staying top of mind and stuff like that. Well, very cool. Well, tell us a little bit more about starting out for you. How'd you end up? I mean, you're doing these incredible records now.
Yeah, I feel very fortunate. I've gotten to work on some really fun stuff.
Just great sounding records. But then also, like, I immediately get a sense. I'm like, every single one of these records is cool. How do you get that gig? How'd you start out from where you started to get into this point?
Yeah, so I moved to Nashville to go to Belmont, and my first spring, I was a freshman, and I'd taken like the big sort of like classroom style class about recording, where they teach you about like the history of microphones and recorded music and stuff. And when I was at Belmont, for any Belmont people out there, AET, or the audio engineering degree, wasn't really a thing yet. So I was music business, which was like a business degree, which made my parents feel more okay with me doing it, because my dad, when he was 19 and 20, he was a photographer in Atlanta. And so I think as long as I've decided I wanted to do this, he was like thinking, well, I hope it works, but if it doesn't, I hope you at least can go get a real job. So anyways, going to Belmont and studying music business made my parents a little bit more okay with it. But that first spring, I was trying to take my first class, or schedule my first class for the following fall in recording, where I could actually be in a studio and set up microphones and learn what was going on. And they told me like, oh, well, there's this new thing called AET that we're doing, and they have priority. And so you'll probably be a junior like a whole another year before you actually do anything in the studio. And I was like, what? I'm not here to take like English classes, It's like, I got to do that, but I'm here to like learn recording and start doing it.
So you already, like, as you went into college, you already had a strong sense that recording was it for you?
Yeah, I was recording my friends' bands and my bands in high school. I did
and that was down in Atlanta?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had a couple of teachers who, I took an electronic music class when I was in like the 10th grade, which was mostly like bad programming, like Band in a Box and like really early like MIDI stuff. But we spent like 2 weeks on recording, and we had an inbox and Pro Tools.
Yeah. I have to say that when I first discovered Band in the Box, I never really used it, but I was super intrigued. I was like, whoa, this looks kind of cool.
It's basically like a bunch of, it's sort of like an earlier version of GarageBand, where there's all this stuff built into it, and you can sort of just click and drag. It's not, it's interesting, but it was like it sort of got me curious. And so then when I was like in 11th grade or something, my dad got me an inbox for my birthday. And so I started recording at home with 2 mics and, in a basement, like a lot I
OG inbox right there on the shelf.
I see that. Oh yeah. I like that. It's
still got a piece of tape on it to hold it together.
Hold it together. Yeah. I think I had a 16 track limit, or something like that. But so when I came to Belmont, I knew I wanted to do recording. But they were telling me it was going to be a couple of years. And then there was this little loophole where they said, well, unless you want to stay this summer after your freshman year, and then you can take it, like in 3 weeks. And I called my dad and I was like, hey, I'm not coming home. And so that first summer, I feel like I learned a lot, started recording, and started meeting people who were also like, just really hungry to start learning and messing around and figuring stuff out. And so I did the Belmont thing. I never went back home really. I stayed like summers and stuff and just worked and took classes and tried to learn everything I could.
Yeah.
And through that, I built a relationship with the folks at Ocean Way. So then as I was finishing, I started doing what's called client services, which is like making coffee and doing setups at night and stuff. It's the entry-level position at Ocean Way. And I sort of built it from there. I had friends and stuff who were in bands. And so even when I was doing client services and making Ocean Way during the day, on the weekends and stuff, I was recording and, trying to do things. And I feel like that was a really interesting time because it was really hard to sort of know where your priorities should be. It's like, on the one hand, it's really fun to be the boss and be like the engineer with your buddies. But when I was client services, I would see how real records were being made, even if I wasn't always in the room. And so I remember the first time doing a few like big setups and seeing how guys making, records that would be on the radio, how they mic drums. You know, it's like you learn the real basic stuff in school, but the first time I saw somebody, set up multiple sets of room mics, and stuff like that. And it was kind of like, huh. So even then, when I wasn't even on the sessions, but I was just in the building, I was learning stuff. And so,
do you remember getting a sense of being a little bit dazzled by the techniques, and then and then feeling a little bit of like internal conflict and confusion about like, but what do I think about the music? Sometimes I'd find myself there where like I was impressed by the technique, but I still liked the music that I came from.
Yeah, sure. And I remember thinking that it just seemed there's just a lot. It's like I was like 21 or something, and it's a little bit overwhelming. Because we'd spend 4 or 5 hours or more setting up for a session, and for my career at Belmont, it's like you could only book the studio in like 4-hour chunks. So I'd have 4 hours to like set up mics, record a song, and then tear mics down. And now I'm spending 5 hours with 3 other people just setting up mics. So it's a little bit like culture shock, you know? But I don't know.
You said now you're doing that. You mean like now?
When I was 21.
When you were 21?
Yeah, it's like setting up mics.
How about now?
Now we don't really move much when I'm at Dan's.
Yeah.
So it's like things kind of live a certain way. I'll tweak stuff from record to record just for a different flavor if there's like an artist we really feel like we should do something different with. But 70% of my setup doesn't really change, which goes back to why I don't really have like a proper assistant. Is because, at a studio like Ocean Way or Blackbird, every night you're tearing everything down and a new engineer is setting everything up and they're repatching and redoing everything. Yeah,
it's that concept of zeroing out the studio.
We haven't, Dan's
blank
studio.
Slate.
Yeah, it hasn't been zeroed out in a decade.
Yeah, it's great.
Stuff might change a little bit, but we're never going back to square one.
It's like, why do all the busy work if you can just simply remove all the busy work?
Yeah, exactly. So, as I was at Ocean Way, leaving, sort of phasing from client services into assisting, all while trying to build sort of my own engineering career on the side. And then each transition from client services to assisting, and then from assisting to engineering happened sort of slowly and then all at once, where one day I just had to say like, hey, I can't assist for the next 2 months. I got too much other work. And then they're like, okay, well, we're going to stop offering because you don't have time for it.
Right.
So it kind of just happened organically. I was fortunate to be building some clients who were getting more and more steady and doing some different stuff that was leading to enough work to where I could transition out of client services and then out of assisting.
And that's a good reason to not be available. Like you're not available for the old gig because you got the new gig that you want. Having to go work in a restaurant because they scheduled you, on a Sunday night for that week. That's maybe less of a good reason to skip a session, right?
Each time's a little bit scary. It's like I remember the first time I didn't do client services, which was like a guaranteed like 2 or 3 days a week. It was minimum wage basically, but it's like it was something. It's like suddenly if all of the clients that I'm assisting for are on vacation the same month, I'm sort of like up a creek, And so I remember each time you sort of leave for the step forward, there's this fear that it's like, I hope I'm not going to regret this and like have to beg for my old job back because I don't have as much work as I thought I had.
I did a mic shootout for my vocals in the studio and tried 20 different microphones from the Shure SM7 to a vintage Neumann U67, but was impressed that my favorite of all was the Roswell Pro Audio Delphos 2 large diaphragm condenser. Handcrafted in California, Roswell Mics brings you inspired design and attention to detail to help you capture a gorgeous vintage sound without the vintage price tag. Check out their beautiful microphones, including the Mini K47 for only $349 at RoswellProAudio.com. Well, all right. So now you're at Easy Eye Sound. Mm-hmm. Tell us about this studio that you're doing with Dan.
Yeah. So Dan moved down here about a decade ago and built the studio. And he brought an engineer with him from Detroit, Colin Dupuis.
Oh yeah, I've met Colin. He's cool.
He's a great engineer, really smart
Colin,
guy.
you're coming on the podcast
now. And Colin understands a lot of things about electronics and circuit design and the sort of the other side of the faceplate of gear that I will never understand. Yeah. And so he helped Dan sort of design the studio, and he wired most of it with another guy, Danny. I think Colin just got to a point where he was busy enough doing other stuff. And Dan was sort of touring with the Arcs some at that point, so he wasn't quite as busy in the studio. And then there was a few opportunities where Colin wasn't available, and I started filling in. And then it started becoming a more permanent thing, I guess, in 2016.
This is the other end of the equation you just described.
Yeah, sure.
You step in, you got to be available to fill in where the new opportunity appears.
Well, and it sort of happened by accident. I mean, I wasn't like looking for a job.
Don't they all?
Yeah, I guess so.
Don't all the gigs kind of happen by accident a little bit?
I was doing a few days here and there for him and doing a good bit of freelance stuff. And then I was on vacation with my wife and her family, and I got a call from Dan's manager. It was like, hey, this was in like April. He was like, what are you doing in May? And I was like, what do you mean? He said, the whole month of May. I was like, oh, well, I guess I could be available. And so May of 16, I guess, he booked like the whole month.
Nice.
And it's 3 years later now. So
nice.
And it kind of never, there's never really anything official, or like, it's just been a bunch of work. Yeah. So
that's cool. Well, tell us about the studio. What do you, I mean, we're dying to know what sort of things you guys arrived at for setup and decided, hey, we're not going to tear that down.
Yeah.
That didn't suck that time. It's great. Let's leave it like that.
Yeah. So the studio is really not very big. If any of you guys out there have seen photos of like RCA Studio B, I would, like, the way I describe it to people is that it's a little bit like if a rock and roll guy bought RCA Studio B and moved in. Our control room's a little bit bigger, but the tracking room is similar, a little bit smaller, lower ceiling. But basically when Dan was building it, he had worked all over the place. You know, he'd worked at big LA studios. Him and Pat had worked at Abbey Road and I guess Studio 2. And he'd also worked in small rooms like Muscle Shoals Sound and some studios in Ohio, and done a bunch of stuff in his basement. And he wanted to build a studio that was reminiscent of like his favorite, like sort of like record manufacturing studios. You know, these places that just
in the way that like Motown was just a factory for music,
or like Sun, like the original Sun was, where it's like everything that came out of there was awesome and had like a thumbprint on it, and just like musical fame,
stacks.
Yeah, but you could the list can go on, and so
okay, let's keep going.
Okay. And he also really loved like Toe Rag in London.
Oh yeah.
And so there's a lot of that.
Have you worked at Toe Rag yourself yet?
No, I haven't worked in London at all.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of that sort of character, I guess, where like it doesn't have to do everything. Again, sort of back to the comparison between a studio like Ocean Way or Blackbird, and this is like, it just has to do what Dan and I want it to do.
Right.
It doesn't have to do what any engineer who books the room wants it to do.
Right.
So, you know, even down to like the microphones, like we don't have a stereo pair of like quote unquote high end like condenser tube microphones because he doesn't really like stereo stuff.
Right.
We used a lot of mono things. Same with like outboard gear. It's like we have got a few things that are stereo here and there, but I don't know, it's very tailored.
Yeah.
So and the tracking room was a little bit more fluid in its earliest versions, where like record to record, things would move around in the room. All the baffles were on wheels, all that kind of stuff. And then by the time I sort of got there, things had found their place a little bit. The drums were sort of always set up in the middle of the room on one side. And then the guitar amps were sort of in a place with baffles that pretty much stayed. And then he's got a couple pianos and an organ and 3 or 4 other keyboards that sort of all lived in a certain part of the room. And then I went up and saw the Loft Wilco studio in Chicago with a friend of mine and took a lot of copious notes mentally about what they were doing that was so cool and so efficient for work. And about that same time, we spent a week down in Muscle Shoals Sound recording. And again, you should check out Muscle Shoals Sound, photos of it redone. It's so cool. But they've got this sort of like house built around the drums with like this, like a cloud that's sort of at an angle, but none of it's real tight.
It's even got like the fake thatched roof kind of look to it.
And there's a bunch of burlap everywhere.
Yeah.
But so it's pretty dead, a lot of burlap, but it's not like really like tightly sealed. So the drummer still feels like he's in the room. Like I think even some of the glass in the baffles isn't there.
Yeah, so, I think you're right.
So we kind of came back and I was like, man, we should do some of that. And so we had some baffles. Ours are kind of movable, but they pretty much stay to where we built a similar thing. We had a cloud hung above the drums. And maybe my favorite thing that we've done in the last couple of years is we had this like these cubbies built for amps. And we've got 6, and it's, if you go look at any of the like Black Keys interviews from this last record release, a lot of them are shot in front of this. And so there's these 6 cubbies, 3 across the top and 3 across the bottom, that are big enough to put like a deluxe or a Magnetone or like a medium-sized amp in, because we don't record like a lot of like big Marshall stuff. It's all like, reasonably sized combos.
Yeah.
And so that's just made the guitar station much more permanent.
So it's almost like 3 amps down low, floor level, and 3 amps right above it.
Yeah.
And do the cubbies even need doors on them, or is it they're just
no doors? They're just open.
But it's just that cubbiness.
Well,
it's the cubbiness that sort of gives you just enough isolation and it makes it work fine. Right?
And we've got, like I said, we've got these baffles sort of in front of the drums. So the guitars aren't really getting into the drums. The keyboards are all sort of on the other side of the room, it's kind of tucked away and sort of close mic'd. So we're really just worried about the guitars bleeding into each other.
Right.
And they're deep enough. The cubbies are probably 3 or 3.5 feet deep, to where you can set it back, a foot or a foot and a half, and have plenty of room to where you're not getting a lot of bleed between guitar amps. And it's not like we're running all 6. We're usually 2, maybe 3. If there's 3 guitar players here that
maybe
day.
It's high time you guys do a 6 guitar band.
It's not outside of the realm of possibility.
So one cool takeaway from that is just this reminder that like, how easily we can default to these concepts of recording, like either we don't do anything to the space and it's all like way too live, or we're like, you've got to isolate everything. When I was going to build my space here, I remember asking Roger Mutno about that, and he was like, because he had just built a studio, and he's showing me the door to the ISO room, and I'm thinking about like, we have to use ceiling caulk on every crack and crevice and everything. And he's like, it doesn't even, there's a hole under the door that goes in there. And he's like, it doesn't matter,
Well, I mean, it's like, have you listened to the Motown, like the 8-track transfers, that are out there?
Yeah.
There's so much bleed everywhere.
Mountain high enough and stuff like that.
Yeah. There's like bleed and distortion and all kinds of stuff, but it's part of what glues it all together.
And it's the balance, the right balance. I mean, if they heard something and it was in somebody else's mic, they would have done something about it if it was too much.
If it was a problem.
Yeah, if it's a problem. But if it's not a problem.
Yeah. And I feel like that's a little bit of there's a little bit of bleed everywhere at Easy Eye. It's just, there's an upright piano 30 feet from a deluxe. Of course, there's going to be a little bit of guitar in that, or drums in it and stuff, but we can pretty much always deal with it. I feel like it helps tie it all together.
I think it does. I think it can actually help the sound come together.
Sure.
I remember doing a jazz band here, which I've mentioned before, where it was everybody, no headphone situation.
Yep.
It's another benefit of doing music that way. You can get everybody out of headphones
Sure.
and get really natural. But like hearing, everybody's right on top of each other. So it was the opposite of isolation.
Yeah.
And still it worked.
Yeah.
Because an important thing to getting the bleed right, I think, is that you can't have mismatched instrument levels.
Sure.
Like it all needs to make sense together for the song and the music. And then the bleed maybe tends to make sense as well.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like it's just more musical across the board.
Now, what about acoustics? Let's talk about some of the hard instruments. What are the hard ones to include in the space and make sure that they're not bleeding too much?
So acoustics and vocals, we actually have on the other side of a wall. But they bleed into each other. And a lot of our records, what you hear from a vocal is what happened on the track. So,
nice.
We sort of have acoustics and vocals. They sort of have their own bleed between the two that we have to deal with. And we don't have a lot of booths. So there's the main track in space, drums, bass, electric guitars, keyboards. And then we've got like a little bit of a booth that we split in half. And one side of it is vocal and the other side is acoustic if we only have one acoustic. If we're cutting with like 2 or 3 acoustics, then they go in the kitchen and they're all facing each other. So then we have tons of bleed between them. But again, I think it sort of helps it work.
Is there a reason for having the acoustics face each other, or is that just how
it just seems to help with like isolating enough?
Yeah.
Because we're using dynamic mics that are pretty much all cardioid.
Cool. Right.
But the one issue goes back to what you were saying about mismatched instrument levels is sometimes we'll have like a banjo. And if there's like a banjo and a gut string.
The poor banjo.
Yeah. But like a banjo and a gut string sitting close to each other, it's like there's as much banjo in the acoustic mic as there is,
It's like tambourine.
Yeah.
Tambourine seems to find its way into everybody else's mic.
Well, and so we do overdubs and we sort of do them in bunches, so like we'll cut a track and then we'll have somebody stack up an electric guitar and, start doing perc and stuff. And that's where we have to be a little bit more careful with bleed, because if somebody's playing like a clave and a piano, maybe the keyboard player played like Wurlitzer or organ on the track, and now he's going to play a piano. And then there's a clave, and we're not even sure if we want to keep the clave. We have to be a little bit more careful about making sure that he's not bleeding on, the piano while we're doing that. So when we get into overdubs, we're a little bit more cautious about it because there's more chance that somebody's going to play something that we just mute altogether.
Right, exactly.
And we want to make sure that we can do it.
We're in the adding too much stuff phase.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Potentially. Okay, very cool. Let's talk more about acoustics. So, like, for example, Dan Auerbach, excuse me, Never in My Wildest Dreams, you got a great sounding acoustic guitar and vocal on that one. And you just mentioned using dynamic mics. What kind of tips do you have for recording acoustics?
To me, it's not always the right move. Never in My Wildest Dreams, we cut all the acoustics were on the tracking floor. Jerry Douglas is on that. I think Russ Paul's also playing acoustic. There's 3 or 4 people playing acoustic guitar. I'm pretty sure, though, that is probably Dan singing on an SM7 with a D19. And he's got this old Guild gut string. That's basically what he played on that whole record.
The D19 is the
AKG acoustic guitar.
Right on.
It's an AKG dynamic mic. It's overpriced now because of the Beatles. Like everything the Beatles touch is too expensive. But it's a great dynamic mic that's got enough top end to be good on acoustic. But I feel like a lot of times with what we're doing, acoustics with like a 67 or a 47 or some big tube mic, it's like I'm taking out all the bottom.
Right.
I don't need all that.
Yeah.
And they almost are too expressive on the top. So we end up sort of either compressing it or pulling some of that super top end off. Yeah. And it ends up sounding like a dynamic mic.
So you might as well start with the right mic.
If we start with the right mic, then we end up not doing much to it. A lot of times I'm not really EQing or compressing much. And it sort of does what we want it to do.
What about recording format? Do you guys record to analog tape? Do you use Pro Tools?
We have an 8-track tape machine that we have used some. but pretty much always we run into Pro Tools directly.
I like that. I like that answer. We have used some. It's like, oh, cool. All right.
Well, it's, we build our Q mix in Pro Tools. And so it's a real pain it's an old 440, an Ampex 440.
Yeah.
And so there's not really a great way for us to build our Q mix the way we normally do and make sure that we would record it, monitor the input, and then when we went to play it back off the repro head, like half the time we'd be missing a track.
Right.
And if you're only monitoring, if you're using no headphones, you can just monitor repro and like make sure that it's all good while it's going down.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
It's just, I don't know, it was, 2% better and not 20% better.
Right. Well, that's, to me, that's really encouraging because, the records you're making sound tremendous. They sound like you're like, oh man, it's got to be analog. And it's so wonderful when you hear a story. It's like, no, it's just getting the right sounds,
and
the right performance and everything.
We're fortunate to have a lot of gear.
Yeah.
So we get, I feel like, a lot of the flavors of analog. On the front end, we've got an Altec console that we use, a bunch of great outboard gear, and then we mix through a Spectrasonics console.
Yeah, tell us about the console.
It's really great. We sort of have a 2-console version of a split console. My Altec console, or Dan's Altec console, is pretty much all the mics sort of stay on the tracks or the channels, but they get bussed to sort of the different chains. So, for example, I have an SM7 that's in the tracking room. Dan's playing electric guitar and singing into this SM7. I'm in red in Pro Tools. I'm just rolling while they're working out the track. He decides he wants to go play acoustic. So he picks up sets down his electric guitar, walks into the acoustic booth, grabs an acoustic, sits down at the mic, and I can sort of bus the acoustic or the vocal mic from the bus or from the
where the electric guitar room is or whatever.
Yeah, I can just change the bus really easily, and then my chain all stays.
Right, interesting. So it's like with the Altec console, you can sort of change your input mic for the vocal.
Yeah, it's hard to explain.
Keep the same compression and EQ and stuff.
Yeah. So we do a lot with busing, which makes the workflow really, I guess it's just easy.
Yeah, fluid.
It's very conducive
efficient
to recording, to where and this goes back to us not really changing much. If we are printing a mix the day before it's going to be mastered, and Dan's like, man, I've got to go add some tom fills. I don't have to set anything up. I can just turn on a couple of preamps and we're ready to go.
Yeah, I think that's so key. And having just recorded a bunch of music all weekend myself with friends, and just remembering again, it's like, man, it's so valuable to have an idea for a keyboard part and just go play it.
Yeah.
Or and to have a harmony part and just go sing it. Like,
sure.
Don't get stuck in setting it all up and what's the, no need to shoot out a microphone.
It doesn't matter. Yeah. And that's something Joyce was really emphasized a lot in his studio, was just always be able to do anything. If he's got an idea for a guitar part, it shouldn't be hard for him to play it and have a good sound.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we have the Altec console that's sort of like the front end of everything, and it feeds all the outboard gear through the buses. And then we mix through the Spectrasonics. And it doesn't really change. I'm using I think about 12 tracks or channels of that console.
Mm-hmm. Of the Spectrasonics?
Of the Spectra.
How many channels is it? 24?
I think it's 24, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's got a monitor section and stuff, but we don't use it. We just use the channel section.
Do you end up using a lot of the EQ, or do you use some routing in there for parallel compressions and things, or is it more like...
It's pretty much just summing, but it does a lot. Because we've got a pretty weird bus matrix in Pro Tools. It's part of a template that helps us break stuff out to the console the way we want.
Yeah.
And then the Altec has a passive mixer in it that's totally separate from the channel section with the buses. And so we have 3 plates and a BX10 that I send from the box, and then those all sum through the Altec passive mixer.
Yeah. Oh, cool. So you're sort of summing the return of the effects.
Summing all the reverbs so that it's really easy for us to print
the
reverbs when we are done with something.
Is the BX10, is that the big AKG spring or something like that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're not using a whole lot of the functionality of the Spectrasonics, but I've A/B'd and it does a lot just in the way that it sums.
Is the Altec mixer like one of those old radio consoles, that kind of thing?
No, it's the mixers. It's
like
really
faders
weird.
or knobs.
It's knobs.
Yeah.
But the console, it's like on the right hand side of the console. I think it was just a custom sort of thing built by Norman Druce.
Okay.
Who you might know Norm. He recently passed away.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear about that.
Yeah, he was a really special dude. He was an incredible mind when it came to recording stuff. He rebuilt.
Let's talk about him
Altec.
for a sec. So I believe you guys, looking at the picture, it looked like you had the Atomic 610
610s, yeah,
monitors, which sound amazing. And those Norman designed and created those for a number of people around Nashville.
It's my understanding, and Colin probably has a little bit better insight into this than I do because he was around for it, but it's my understanding that Dan and Norm sort of brainchilded the 610s together because Dan had these old Altecs that were that gray color that sort of became the color of the Atomics. And Dan was like, man, I would love for you to build something that could go in here that would sound good. And I think it sort of spawned a whole bunch of thoughts with Norm, and he ended up building the big ones, which Dan has a few pairs of.
Yeah.
I can't remember what they're called, but they're basically mains. So yeah, Norm is an incredible dude who built a lot of great stuff for Dan that we still use all the time.
Very cool. What other stuff comes to mind as far as the studio, just like unusual gear or instruments or anything like that?
Unusual.
I don't know, just stuff. Our favorite.
I mean,
things.
we have I got really frustrated the other day I guess a month ago or whatever it was, when Universal Audio announced the UA 176 plugin.
Okay.
Because we have a real 176. I feel like every time they make something in a plugin form, it gets more expensive. And I've been like, man, one of these days I'm going to buy a real 176, and now I can't afford it. But I have a 176 that we use on vocals. That's incredible.
Well, they got a few of those at Sunset Sound, so just go.
Just go ask them if we can rent one. Yeah,
just rent them.
But yeah, I mean, and it's sort of like using a real Fairchild.
Yeah.
If you ever have the luxury, you sort of realize why they're so expensive.
I don't know exactly what's going on in a 176, but my feeling about it was like, this is like the original tube pre-1176.
Yeah, I think more or less that's
something like that.
The idea, yeah.
But they sound awesome. Just one big input knob, one big output knob.
Yeah, and it's got like a ratio controlled. Ours is, a 176B. I don't know. They just do something.
I think I remember they don't have an attack and a release on it, or
they do, but they don't work the same way that you would think an attack.
More like a Fairchild, just like a
it's a little bit
constant.
It's a little bit more gentle, but we don't really mess with that stuff. It's pretty much just input and output, but they break up nice if you hit them right. And you can really crush a vocal, and it just sounds musical usually.
That sounds great.
Right,
I'm always amazed at how often crushing something makes it all sound better until it doesn't.
Yeah. And I feel like it's, in some ways, it's easier to get away with some of the really classic designed things like that. Or like we have an LA2, not an LA2A, but an LA2. And it's the same thing where like I'll look over and it's like crushing a bass guitar, and it just makes it sound like it was played perfectly.
Yeah.
It doesn't sound like overcompressed or small or anything. It just sounds right.
Seems like the stay level.
Yeah, very similar kind of thing.
Same kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then did you guys get into like old RCA and Collins compressors and Federals and stuff like that?
Dan has a pair of Collins that aren't at the studio right now. We don't have any RCA stuff, compressors. We do have a pair of Pi compressors, which I got not too long ago, and those are awesome. They're really strange, but really cool. They're another one of those things that sort of instantly has a color, even if it's not doing much.
And let's not forget the Spectrasonic 610. Tell us
we have a
that.
Spectra 610, which is kind of stays on our snare chain like a lot of people. And I was telling.
So what on the do you do a top and bottom mic and blend it through that, or just one of them?
So I use a Altec 1567 on kick and snare. And so, yeah, I blend it. They're non-modded. I think that there's something different about the ones that have the direct out mods versus using the full gain stage. So I have a top and bottom snare on one of the 1567s, and that feeds Chandler Little Devil EQ, and then a Spectra 610, an old one.
Very cool.
And I'm not doing much with the Spectra, but it just helps shape the transient a little bit.
Snare up in your face a little more.
Yeah. And I mentioned the 8-track Ampex. We actually run through the heads of it. I think I use about 6 of them right now, just for color and a little bit of grit. But we're not actually hitting the tape. It's just the heads.
Yeah.
Which those are, fairly affordable head units that are fun to play with if you're looking for something that's a little bit outside the box. I have some friends who have them that use them just as like line amps or goofing around and stuff.
So you're sitting next to my MCI JH16.
Yeah.
And sadly, we also just lost Steve Sadler, who's the MCI guy here in Nashville, who's basically the treasure trove of knowledge.
I went to his storage unit once, right?
What's that?
Doesn't he have a storage unit?
He has, he works with Randy Blevins as well. And Randy also
that's something
knows tons, he's the MCI guy as well. But Steve always had a shop when I was working with him, and he recently moved over to East Nashville, and he was so dedicated, he lived at the shop, too. He's just really lived and breathed all this stuff. It's pretty amazing. But I remember learning a long time ago from Kyle Lenning, actually. He mentioned when he saw my MCI JH16 that there was somebody that built converters that you would plug into the head stack. So you would use the machine for all the analog, and you just plug it into the head stack, and it was converters to go into Pro Tools. And I never got to see one or try them, but I was so fascinated. I was like, that sounds awesome.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
So who knows? Maybe we'll see more of that kind of thinking down the road. It'd be cool to just I don't know, use I don't want us to lose all the old gear. I wanted to find a new way of having a home in the studio,
Yeah, well, I'm trying to buy some pretty much all the time, and it's not getting any cheaper. So I don't think you're the only one who still wants the old gear. Yeah,
well, hopefully when you do buy it, it becomes a good, smart investment.
Yeah, so far so good, I guess.
Well, let's take a break for just a moment. We'll come right back in for the jam session. Rockstars, a reminder that all this stuff I'm talking about here with Alan, we're going to have links to in the show notes. You can go check out his music and listen to some of these amazing records, and we'll talk more specifically about them when we get back in just a moment. Cheers. The Spectra 1964 model was created by the missile engineers who are central in rolling out the systems that have protected the free world for over half a century. The extremely stable high-circuit design of the 101 amplifier provides unequaled headroom, low noise, and linear output, irrespective of transient audio peaks, giving you clearer, punchier, dynamic recordings. During the height of record making, the 101 preamp was the perfect choice to build consoles for Tom Dowd, Muscle Shoals, Stack Studios, Ardent Studios, and New York City Record Plant, bringing you the sounds of ZZ Top, Aerosmith, Bruce Springsteen, King Crimson, John Lennon, and so many more. The Spectra 1964 legacy is carried on today through Bill Cheney and Jim Romney. Now you can get that same sound in your studio with the STX 100 mic pre and STX 500 EQ. Add the Cinemag Transformer BBDI and the C610 comp limiter, and you can have a truly awesome sound. Go to Spectra1964.com to learn more, or click the link in the show notes below. Are you using a Mac in your recording studio? Are you tired of feeling like the studio setup you worked so hard to create is becoming obsolete too quickly? Wouldn't it feel great to have a trusted friend to help you keep your existing Mac and studio setup current and relevant so that you can focus on the thing you love most, which is making great music? Well, now you can rely on OWC, Otherworld Computing, which you can find at OWC.com, whose mission it is to help you get the most mileage out of your Mac. Whether you need to upgrade your RAM, install an SSD, add more connectivity, or simply find a great used Mac that's ready to rock, OWC will help take your studio far into the future with a vast library of DIY install videos, 24/7 friendly support, and free shipping in the US on most items over $49. Why get frustrated and ditch your existing computer when you can take your studio far into the future with OWC? Learn more at OWC.com and find out how awesome your Mac can be at OWC. It was 1971 in a New York City basement when Eventide revolutionized the audio world by introducing the world's first studio effects processor, the Instant Phaser, and the first digital effect, the H910 Harmonizer. Eventide soon followed with the Instant Flanger, Omnipressor, SP2016 Reverb, and H949 and H3000 Harmonizers, which have been favorites of A-list mixers like Michael Brower, Joe Ciccarelli, Mick Guzowski, and Dave Pensado, and heard on countless hit records over the decades. Today, Eventide brings all that sound to your stage and studio with modern solutions like the H9000 Harmonizer, their complete line of guitar pedals, including the versatile H9 Max, and transformative plugins like Micropitch, Physion, Black Hole, and Mangled Reverb. Take your next mix in your studio to a whole new level. Go to eventide.com or click the link in the show notes below. Are you sick of bothering family and neighbors when you're just trying to rehearse or record your music? Do outside noises or computer fans get into your studio mics and ruin your recordings? You could book a pro studio to record every time, but that would add up quickly, and doing permanent construction to soundproof your studio can easily cost up to $100,000 or more. Trust me, I know. And you can't take that with you when you eventually move the studio. Don't you wish there was an easy solution right now? Whisper Room ISO Booths offers a simple way to install a comfortable, quiet, ventilated ISO booth in your studio with easy line of sight for recording vocals, guitar amps, or even drums in a variety of sizes. For 30 years, Whisper Room has been solving studio isolation needs worldwide with ISO booths that are shippable, portable, and can be assembled in an afternoon. Now you can get pro vocal recordings right in your home studio, practice whenever you want, and start using real guitar amps again. Get 10% off the 4x4 or 4x6 booths when you mention Recording Studio Rockstars at whisperroom.com or click the link in the show notes below. Hey Rockstars, we're back now for the jam session, second half of the show. My guest today is Alan Parker, joining us on Recording Studio Rockstars. Alan, are you ready to jam?
Let's do it.
All right. Dude, you incredibly generously showed up with well, I think it was generous. You didn't ask me for $100 yet.
Well, not yet.
Not yet. But you showed up with 3 vinyl records for me for the studio here, and they look amazing. So they all come from Easy Eye Sound.
Yes, sir.
I think these are all ones that you've done with Dan. Mm-hmm. Shannon and the Clams.
Yep, that was a fun one.
Yola, Walk Through Fire, and Jimmy Duck Holmes, Cypress Grove. Let's start with that one. Yep. Tell us about Jimmy Duck Holmes. What's the story behind this record?
Jimmy Duck is a crotchety blues musician from Bentonia, Mississippi, whose parents started what is now the oldest juke joint in America.
Nice.
It's called the Blue Front Cafe, and Jimmy still opens it every day. And it's just this little blues hole in the wall. They serve beer in cups of ice. Do with that what you will. But Jimmy came up and played some songs with Dan and a bass player and a percussionist. And we got what we could out of him in a couple of days. And it turned into a really cool record. He's sort of the last of this style of blues called Bentonian blues.
Yeah.
Which I'm no expert in. I learned a little bit about while we were working and talking through it. But it's a cool record. It's like really like hypnotic and just.
Is it a different kind of tuning or something like that?
Yeah, the Bentonian blues is the way I understand it is a different tuning to where it's a little bit more. There's like a drone kind of in it where it's basically all over one chord, and so it sort of just floats on by.
Yeah,
I don't know. It's cool. You should check it out. It's there's a few songs on there that are like very Bentonian. And he plays like some sort of like classics too, like that are from that, Junior Kimbrough.
So Jimmy came up to work with you guys here at Easy Eye.
Yeah.
And then what do you remember about the session and the ways that the ways you got certain sounds on that?
Yeah, it was tricky. So Jimmy brought this acoustic that was the worst acoustic I've ever tried to record. Not because of the guitar itself, but he had like a pickup in it that wasn't really attached anymore. It was like it was rattling around just like holding it, much less when he played it. And so we we sent it down the road to Carter because we do a lot of work with the Carter Vintage Guitar folks. And
okay, great.
Just we're like, hey, can you guys just sort of fix this a little bit just so we can use it, And so they did, and even then it was just problematic. So we had him play. Dan's got this beautiful Trini Lopez that was Mississippi Fred McDowell's. And so Dan was like, man, why don't you, try this guitar for a little while? We'll plug it into a little amp, And so we worked for a couple of hours, and then Jimmy was like standing outside smoking, and Dan was like, hey man, like, how do you feel like everything's going? And he goes, I just think that, you're trying to make me too slick with this electric guitar. I feel like I lost some of the edge with the acoustic. If you're just worried about the money, maybe this ain't gonna work. And Dan and I just busted out laughing because it's like, dude, you're like a 75-year-old blues musician from like the middle of nowhere in Mississippi. Ain't nobody here worried about the money. Like, this is a labor of love for Dan because he, grew up listening to this guy play,
That's great.
But so it's some acoustic, some electric. And Eric Deaton played bass on it. He played with Junior Kimbrough when he was still around, and he lives down in Mississippi. And Sam Bacco played percussion on it. And the hard part about a guy like Jimmy is he's used to just playing for hours by himself in front of a few people or, a small club or whatever. So he's not used to playing with people, much less having other people try to play with him.
I used to playing in a band ensemble is new territory.
And so he was everybody's wearing headphones, but he would just go, like, just start playing a song and finish, Big Diamond.
Yeah, you don't always know when the change is going to happen.
Well, and then he'd just sort of start the next one. And so, like, Sam and Eric would sort of just play catch up. And Eric Deaton, the bass player, he's done a lot of gigs with guys like this, and he knows all those tunes because a lot of them are standards. Right. So he can sort of follow along a little bit better. But there was a few times where Sam Bacco, it looked like his head was about to spin off because he was like, what? I don't even know what to do. He's like speeding up and slowing down and doing stuff. So it's a little bit
drums.
He was playing really more like percussion-ish in lieu of drums. There's a few tracks with drums, but it's like some stuff where he's just playing like a kick drum sort of sound on like a conga.
Yeah. Flexi drums.
Yeah. A lot of sort of like broken kit stuff.
Yeah.
So, and then, I don't know, we sort of built, once we had the form, we sort of built from there. So once we knew what the song would be, it was a little bit easier for Sam to then go back and like add a few things that made it sound a little bit, fuller.
So as an engineer, you've got this great setup in your studio. You're talking about this incredible busing matrix where you can grab a mic. If somebody moves to a new location, you just do a switch and you sort of feed it through the chain. And then you can also kind of choose, or I don't know if you can blend the busing chain that goes into Pro Tools from that as well.
So this is a great example of what I was talking about. Sorry if it was a little bit confusing earlier. So Sam would say, sit down at the drum kit, right? And I've got 5 or 6 drum mics open and 5 or 6 tracks in Pro Tools recording, kick, snare, overhead, a couple of toms, etc. And they start playing, and Jimmy Duck doesn't stop, but the song ends. I can't really like stop and say, all right, everybody, wait. I sort of have to just keep rolling because I'm not really sure.
Does that ever make you nervous when you're like, what if we lose the audio file?
Sometimes. And sometimes I'll just do a real quick, like, stop and start. Just so I make a new file.
That's when the letter N is your friend.
Yeah, which normally drives me crazy, but every once in a while you got to have it.
And Rockstar's N is the thing that makes the playhead follow the cursor. I don't know how to explain that exactly, but
so when you hit stop, if you've been playing or recording and then you hit play again, it will pick up where you stopped, as opposed to at the beginning of
as opposed to going back to the beginning. You're like, nah, we're recording over the take we just did.
So we're rolling. We've sort of finished a song. Sam's playing drums, and Jimmy Duck starts right into the next track, and maybe it's a little bit different vibe. So Sam, because he's worried about the music, not about me, he knows it's my job to make sure it's getting captured. He just gets up from the drum kit and grabs a tambourine and walks over to a conga. Well, I don't have the conga mic open, but because of the way that I'm bussing, it's really easy for me to assign the conga to the snare, let's say, and turn the snare off, and then maybe assign the tambourine, like grab a second mic, and assign that to the overhead. So I can, easily shift which mics are going to which tracks and which chain that they're utilizing. instead of if I were in a normal studio with like an insert point where I would have to move patches and change inputs in Pro Tools and all that stuff. So.
Well, it's one of those things that, back in console days, it's the beauty of consoles is that you can have a whole bunch of things patched in, mics that are going into all these channels, and with the routing matrix and bring a fader up or down, it's easier to do that kind of thing. And we forget that in the Pro Tools world where you're like, well, I have to make a new track and select an input and I have to move a patch over there and all this kind of stuff. That flexibility is pretty genius.
Well, it's just very conducive to the way that we work. You know?
And again, we were saying the takeaway from describing all these flexible routing things is not necessarily that you have to listen to this and totally get it and memorize some setup. It's more that it's that reminder that like whatever your studio situation is, whatever your music making situation is, arriving at your personal template or technique so that the engineering, the tech gets out of the way of the music is always a great choice.
One of the things that I had noted for a quote or a piece of advice was Ben Fowler, who's an engineer and mixer in Nashville that I work for a lot. One of the things he used to always tell me when I was assisting was never over-engineer on a session, and never let engineering get in the way of a take. There's some guys who have a tendency to like, hang on, stop the thing. I've got to go change a snare mic, and like there's 8 guys ready to play a song and he's going to go make an adjustment, just so that everybody knows he's doing something. And Ben was way more like, we all got into this for like the music. So never let the engineering get in the way of that.
Yeah.
And I feel
I pretty quickly hopefully learned not to stop a take to change a mic.
I've seen it though.
But I'll still change a mic or I'll like wait. I learned to take a note to myself so that in between the take, if you can bust out there really fast and do it. But what's funny is so often you bust out there really fast, you make the change, and then you come back in later and you're like, you know what, it was better before.
Yeah. No, it's true.
Isn't it a weird thing?
Yeah. But I feel like sometimes, especially when we spend a lot of time with other engineers and we get to talking about the nerdy things that we care about, we have a tendency to forget that like we're really just here to like make the music great.
Yeah.
It's like it's not about making great sounds. If it's about making great sounds that are complementary of the music on the other side of the microphone.
Yeah. Now, are you playing a bunch of music now too still, or are you
almost never?
You're not going out and sitting at the drum kit anymore?
No, I haven't. When I moved to Nashville, I just made all these friends who were much better than me, and I enjoyed this side of it more. I go hear music some, but I don't really play hardly at all.
One of the things that I picked up on as a reminder to myself this last session I was doing was the difference between some of the creative engineering decisions you make when you're right in the thick of all this music happening and like you're trying to do a bunch of songs or it's late at night or whatever, versus when you've got the breathing room, like it's the day after and you're like, okay, now I should go do some overdubs. It can be so much harder to like it's, or I should say it's easier when you've got that nice wide open day to do some overdubs to over engineer.
Yeah, that's true. We can overdo it when we have the luxury of it, and I feel like that's especially true with mixing it in the home studio or personal mix studio environment. It makes it almost impossible to like say like, yes, it's done. You can always like go listen one more time in your car and go like make one more adjustment. So I think sometimes when we have a lot of time, it's really easy to worry about stuff that doesn't really need to be worried about.
Yeah, it's sort of like the idea of a perfectly balanced mix is the worst thing ever.
What does that mean? Yeah.
It's like you end up with a perfect beige. On the whole thing.
Perfect middle of the road.
Everything's gray. You're like, wait, why does my mix sound completely gray now?
Yeah,
because you need those bold elements in there.
Yeah.
Again, Roger Mutino was the one who said to me once, he was like, little changes in the mix level, forget that. He was like, if you're going to make a change, make a 3 dB change.
Yeah.
Because all his favorite stuff was always like bolder differences between things.
I got to work on a record with Trina Shoemaker.
Yeah.
She's incredible. And one time I was kind of assisting, but her big sort of philosophy is that she really likes to empower assistants to be like sort of like co-engineers, especially if she's like sort of co-producing. And so we were working on this Indigo Girls record for a couple weeks, and she was really quick to say like, hey, can you just make this thing better or whatever? And there was one song where there was like, I can't remember if it was we were doing percussion or something. And I was like, I asked her, hey, should we EQ that, a little more? And she was like, yeah, I think, go for it. And so I went over there and just sort of like, just barely like breathed on the EQ. And she was like, well, what? I thought you were going to EQ it. And was like sort of, trying to make me embarrassed in a way that was teaching me a lesson. It's like, if you're going to do it, then do it. Don't just like pretend to do it. Like do it with some boldness, because if it's worth you walking all the way over there and grabbing the knob, then like make it count, and I feel like she engineers that way. It's kind of inspiring. It's like,
yeah, she definitely makes bold moves. I mean, I think it was the Queens of the Stone Age, or maybe that was the record I remember discovering her work on.
Yeah, she's really great.
All right, cool. So making blues records. One of the things that I did notice about the sounds, you were talking about the drums. I think you mentioned the Altec 1567s.
Yeah.
Those are dynamic mics.
Those are the green mixers.
Oh, those. Oh, right. Oh, and that's what you're using on kick and snare.
Well,
sorry.
I use that on kick and snare.
What about mic choices for drums? What are some things that you found valuable?
I've got a D36 that I love. That I use on kick drum a lot. But the other day it was being weird, and we went out there and put an SM7. Just like, again, we were red, and so we had to just sort of like make it work. And I just grabbed something, and it sounded good too. We've got good drums that make it a little bit easier.
How about the overheads? Do you ever use dynamics for overheads?
Yeah, I think overheads are probably where I change things the most, just depending on the session. I use a mono Coles a lot. Mm-hmm. I use KM54 occasionally, which is obviously a brighter, small diaphragm tube mic, and it like crunches up real nice, whereas the Coles I feel like can get too thick. Sometimes
sometimes the low end's a little
much,
especially in a small space, maybe.
Yeah, and you can carve it out a little bit, but I also feel like sometimes I hear the backside of it just because it's
right. It's figure eight.
It's figure eight, so sometimes I feel like I can hear sort of the air on the other side of it.
Now, have you ever heard anybody say that the weight of the ribbon makes it sound darker? So if you're going horizontal, it sounds darker than if you have the Coles vertical?
I've heard that because I knew some guys who swore about pointing the Coles like on a room mic, getting them high enough to where you could have them sort of pointed down.
Right, and that darkens them a little or something.
Yeah, I don't notice a huge difference in our space when I'm using it on an overhead. But sometimes like the 54 is a little bit more like it sounds, Motown used a lot of like small diaphragm tube mics.
Yeah.
So it gets a little bit more of that like classic crunch that, I feel like without sounding like a decapitator or something because it's on the front end.
Right.
I also use dynamics sometimes too on overheads. I use an AKG D19 or sometimes I use like an EV 635, it's like an omnidirectional.
What's the result of using a dynamic on the overhead that your brain might think, oh, this could be the solution for this sound?
It goes back to sort of the same thing as acoustics. Sometimes I feel like we use so many dynamic mics throughout our recording that sometimes like a big, beautiful overhead just sounds like disingenuous with the track.
Right. It doesn't fit or blend.
It'd be like if I used a snare sample from like a Lars snare sample or something that's like some super modern like crack and rock snare drum. It's going to sound really weird against sort of what we
on a
do.
fingerpick folk tune or something.
Yeah, right. So I feel like sometimes dynamic mics just help keep the drums from being too important. It's like they still have punch and they move things from like a rhythmic standpoint, but like we don't make a lot of records that are about the drummer, even though we record really great drummers. It's pretty much always about the singer and about the songs. And so I don't need big, like loud overheads that are grabbing, your attention.
Yeah, it's another reminder too. It's like the frequency range, from the lowest lows to the highest highs. There's a analogy a little bit to like painting. Like, when you go to the art museum and you see the realism paintings, it's a very different use of, like, you'd see that realist painters wanted to like have the darkest darks and the brightest brights and stuff. And that's one way of creating art, and then there would be these expressionists where it's like, oh, it's just a handful of different shades or tones, and it's totally moving. And I think it's good for us to remember that that's the same that exists in music too. It's like, you don't have to have the deepest lows and the highest highs in this sound that you're creating.
Well,
you just need.
It goes back to what you were saying about a mix becoming sort of a nice beige. It's like everything can't be important, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
And like we've talked.
But on this podcast, you can. Though.
Well, I don't know about that, but I think that that's true in a lot of ways. And also with, I've had like mix clients who are like, I really want the guitars to just be really big and like the vocal to sound like larger than life and the drums to just, it's like, well, there's only so much room. Like you go listen to AC/DC records and like the reason they sound huge is because they picked their battles. Like there's not a lot happening. So there's room for everything to sound big, And I feel like our tracks tend to be pretty dense. And so I'm going to be carving a lot of low mids and a lot of, bottom end out of a lot of things, and also dulling down a lot of things because there's only so much room. And I feel like using a lot of dynamic mics sort of saves a little bit of that trouble because it's like the mic's sort of already EQ'd and processed the way that I would do it,
If you're not, well, I guess if it's a hindsight thing, then it's just going to be a mixed decision. But what do you notice about the difference about like if I carve it here, it seems to work better. I like it better than if I carve it here. Like, early in the chain, in a box, maybe a filter box on its way into Pro Tools or with a plugin.
That's a great question. I guess a little bit of it depends on how much flexibility I want to have. Like with maybe say percussion, like if we're doing like a conga or like a hand drum, I'm probably more likely to leave myself some room to put some bottom and top back in if the conga becomes more important later. Like maybe it's a song where like right now it's just like an overdub, but if it's a slightly more like acoustic thing, maybe there's a chance that later we're going to just like make the drums really small and make it about like the conga and the tambourine. So like, I don't want to carve everything out and not leave myself any room, but I also really like to commit. I like getting it right the first time because I feel like when I do that, it ends up being better. It's like if I can get it right on the track while it's all happening, that's always the easiest songs to mix. And I feel like they end up just sounding the most musical because I think the musicians sort of play into the sounds that I'm feeding them in the headphones and the singer's like singing into it. One of my favorite stories about that recently is there's a record that's that we just made that's not entirely out yet. There's 2 tracks. It's Marcus King.
Yeah.
He's got a record that's been announced called El Dorado.
Mm-hmm.
And there's the first track that came out was called The Well. And the mix on there is the mix from the like 11 o'clock, the night we cut it. And we had 2 drummers, 3 guitar players, plus Marcus, 2 keyboard players, live vocal. And we just sort of got in this thing. And as we were getting the sounds and finding the parts, it's like, it was all right. And we cut it. And then like a few hours later, we pulled it up to print a rough mix of it. And I just sort of put a little bit of a ride on a vocal and pulled up like, I think a time cube kind of, tape delay or a tube delay thing.
Now, do you have a real time cube or you use the plug-in version?
We have a real one. Why
don't you tell the rock stars what a time cube is?
So a Cooper time cube is a pretty early delay that is the face, like the rack of it looks like it's a Uri box. So it looks kind of like an 1176 sort of styling. But it has an XLR that interacts with a box that looks like a really small plate. It's like, I guess about 2.5 feet tall and 2.5 feet wide and 6 or 8 inches deep. And it's got 2 like basically garden hoses in it with a transducer on either side.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of like ZZ Top sort of like vocal spatial effect is that time cube.
Cool.
And the original one, you can run either side A, which is I think 14 milliseconds, side B, which is 16 milliseconds, or you can run side A into side B mono and have a 30-second delay. That sort of has this like comb filtering feel to it because of the garden hose.
Yeah, so you could do the A and the B and pan them on either side or something, right?
Yeah. And that's really the thing about it is most people call it a delay, but 14 and 16 is really more like just a spatial processor because it's so short.
Let's get geeky about this. We're well within the Haas effect, Rockstars. So which means that I think 30 seconds is considered the threshold. If you go, not 30 seconds, 30 milliseconds. Hopefully you can hear a delay of 30 seconds. Hopefully you can hear a delay of 30 seconds. If you go above 30 milliseconds, then you hear a distinct echo.
Right.
The human ear does. And if it's below that, it sounds like it's the same sound, but just it's like a phasey.
Yeah. It's like a flange.
Flangey thing.
So I will say that we've used the real-time cube and it sounds cool, but in this particular instance, I think that the UAD plugin is better because the things that they added to it, I feel like are really helpful. You can make it longer and you can still use that same sound, but create a little bit more of an actual delay.
Right.
That you hear more like you would hear a tape slap.
Right. If you wanted to do that with the real stuff, you'd have to bust out a tape machine.
Or you'd have to print it in Pro Tools and nudge it. Not that I've ever done that. So yeah, the Cooper Time Cube's awesome. If you ever have a chance to play with a real one or the plugin, I would encourage you to do it. It's a cool, unique sound.
And then also, there's been a guest, Ryan Earnhardt, was on the podcast from Creative Sound Labs over in Asheville, and he makes a lot of interesting videos. And he did a video where he took the garden hose and with 57s in either end and put it in front of the drum kit.
Oh yeah,
you can record that way, and you get extra sound. So I haven't messed with the garden hose thing yet, but I'd love to do that. And I forgot who it was. Was it like Stockhausen or somebody like that made sound houses back in the 1700s or something, or whatever it was, or earlier than that? And they were literally like these kind of furniture boxes that were just meant to create different spatial sound effects. Huh. That's the best I can describe it. They look like pieces of furniture.
How big were they?
Like a bureau, like a tape machine or something like that. You just put it in there, and it was supposed to manipulate the acoustical sound. And I was like, man, I want to get those and put mics in them.
Yeah, I love real the Easy Eye is a pretty dead studio. It's not like you don't feel like the air leaving your ears. It's not that dead.
Yeah,
but we don't take a lot of big room mics or anything,
Yeah.
But we do have this bathroom that I use as a little chamber from time to time. And we've kicked around, just because real estate in Nashville is so crazy, we're kind of always talking about if we ever have to move. And the one thing I always tell Dan is if we move, I'm building a real chamber.
Right.
It's non-negotiable. We're going to have a dedicated chamber.
That's what I want to do too.
There's just nothing like real echo chambers.
Cal Muskie built one over at Addiction Sound, and they actually built it under the parking lot.
Oh, like Capitol.
Yeah. And I thought about the same thing. I was like, man, wonder what kind of permits you need to just dig a hole.
I think maybe you just do it and wait for them to stop you. We're building this really interesting parking lot that reinforced.
But chambers are pretty amazing. You can create something with a great deal of usable echo in a not so big space if you do it really smart.
Yep, it's true. And you can it's amazing how much you can adjust the length with what's in there. Even just setting a chair or something that's got some soft surfaces
will
dry that bath. Yeah. It is a little awkward in the bathroom.
We'll see in a couple of months.
Because it's still our bathroom,
right?
That's used.
You always have to remember to turn off the mic.
Yeah. Whenever I go in there, I just unplug it. But speaking of chambers, my favorite software right now plugin is the UA Capital thing. I don't want to talk about UA the whole time. I feel like everybody knows about UA plugins, but the Capital thing just came out in the last few months, and it is, I think, incredible. It's one of my favorite things I've ever made.
That's so cool. That's so cool. I'm guilty of not using UA yet. Actually, I did. I had the UA TDM plugins with my older Pro Tools rig. I just simply haven't gotten the interface to start collecting plugins, but I hear repeatedly.
Yeah.
I don't use top quality.
I don't use the normal stuff as much, just the basic channel
11,
strips.
7, right.
And the compressors and things. I use the weirder stuff. I use a lot of the harmonic stuff and the spatial things. They've got an MXR flanger, the blue
Oh,
flanger
nice.
that I use
Like
all the time.
the pedal, the MXR
No, the
pedal?
rack mount,
rack
like
mount
the dual one. And I use like a lot of their tape stuff and the reverbs a bunch.
That's fun. I mean, the plugin world is really fun. It's really fun to have all these tools and toys to play with. But you make a good point that it does cause us to play with the sounds on the back end of the creative process instead of on the front end a lot of times.
Yeah. And there's a few things that I feel like I can fake to a certain degree, but when I get it right with the real thing, it's always better. Like, I feel like good vocal distortion, like the right amount, is always better if I get it on the front.
Yeah.
And that's a big part of
Definitely.
of what Dan likes in music, and something that I'm always trying to find the right balance. And I guess I feel like it's because if the singer's hearing it in the headphones, they're performing into it,
Yeah.
and that's always going to be more interesting than me putting something on it afterwards and trying to, make it sound inspired.
Yeah. And on a very simple concept, if you have some experience like playing the drum kit into the mics, if what you're hearing back is quiet in the headphones, you're going to be far more inclined to hit the drums really hard.
Sure.
And if what you're hearing is super amped up, you're going to be inclined to discover that, oh, wow, I can just barely tap this and let this ring a little bit and just the right sustain and create something that wouldn't have existed otherwise because you hear it.
Yeah. And then you're playing sort of into the final performance a little bit more instead of just like playing something that's very beige and then hoping that it becomes interesting in the mix,
Yeah.
I feel like in a lot of ways, the flexibility of software and plugins and everybody having a home studio where you can mix on something forever has done us a disservice in that sometimes we're scared to like really go for something.
Yeah.
And you end up with a lot of stuff that's kind of like lukewarm.
But, ironically, I think it does kind of open up the opportunity
it's true.
to create a studio environment for yourself and for other people you want to work with where like your thing is about just, capturing a cool sound on the way in. And then people really recognize that when they hear, when people work with you and and track a record and then take it home to their studio to mix it. And they're like, oh my God, this stuff just sounds great. You know?
That's the
I
hope.
think it's encouraging. So here's a record that you brought. Another one is Yola. Tell us about Yola. So she has this incredible voice. And, there's, again, what was the track that we put in the YouTube playlist?
I think Far Away Look.
Yeah, Far Away Look. What a beautiful sounding thing. That actually reminded me of Scott Walker 3.
Yeah.
It's just that lush
She's
sound.
She's a really big personality, a big singer. She's from Bristol. If you don't know Yola, and you sort of like classic music, not classical music, but like, big classic sounding records, I would encourage you to go check it out. There's some big stuff on there that I think is really special. Far Away Look being one of them.
Yeah, you even have like concert bells in there.
Yeah, there's all kinds. Yeah.
Is that a real one you guys recorded? You guys mix and match with some samples?
No, we've got, if it's out of tune, it's probably real.
Right, yeah, totally.
We've got,
and you probably like it better.
Well, I don't know. Sometimes it makes it easier to hear it, I guess. We've got some tubular bells and a glockenspiel, vibraphone, and marimba. So yeah, we use the real stuff. Sometimes we'll use them, like we've got one of the new Mellotrons, which those are incredible.
Yeah.
And sometimes we use sounds from that, but a lot of times we use the real thing.
Now, does the new Mellotron actually have tape in it, or is it the one that has the great samples?
It's just the great samples. Yeah. And it's just got so much in it. It's a little bit overwhelming, but everything in it sounds really good.
Have you guys gotten the Optigon player? I forgot what the official name is.
Panoptigon.
Yeah, the Panoptigon.
Yeah, we have that because Dan's got a bunch of old Optigon discs, and it plays. There's another, I'm spacing on what it's called, but there's a couple other like optical based discs that it also plays.
Oh, really?
I think that's the big thing is it plays discs from 3 or 4 different systems.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that. I have an Optigon here too, and I just used it, and it was like so funny. Sure enough, it turned out just great, despite the fact that the Optigon is completely out of tune, and you have to figure out how to manually tune it, and it's buzzy, and it does all kinds of weird things. The other thing I discovered was I didn't bother putting a mic on it. I used the mic that was behind me on the xylophone, and it sounds perfect like that.
Like in the room a little bit?
Yeah. What thoughts do you have about those opportunities to use the mic in the wrong way, and that always turns out to be the better choice.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't want to say the wrong way, but I guess I feel like so much music now is made within a computer, right? Whether it's programmed or whatever. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I feel like a little bit of what I like to do is just sort of the antithesis to that. I like when you can hear that it's a person in a chair playing an acoustic guitar and singing, or it's a person playing bells, like not perfectly in a room where maybe you hear them like lean to their right or left or whatever. I like the humanness of it. And so I guess I feel like sometimes by taking a step back or like, only using one mic on two different people that are playing chimes and glockenspiel at the same time, you end up with for one, they're balancing themselves, which I think is nice.
Right.
And two, it sounds like those things in a space, not like a perfectly recorded chime and a perfectly recorded.
It's kind of like the frequency response. When everything sounds like it's the same distance from the instrument,
yep,
then you can't put them together in the mix. There's no sense of depth.
Yeah. And I feel like especially if you're working in an environment where there's limited options in terms of like mics and preamps and stuff, you'd probably be amazed how much depth you can create in a track with just distance from a mic,
Yeah, totally.
Like I feel like a lot of times what I'm trying to do in a mix is create sort of that depth of field, where there's certain things that are like right up, like right at your ears.
Yeah.
Some things that are a little bit further behind, and then some things that are way back.
And those things that are right up in your ears are sometimes the kick, snare, and vocal.
Yeah, yeah. Or acoustic if it's like a real rhythmic thing or whatever it is, And sometimes that's with reverb and like things with a big lush tail, but sometimes it's with like a little bit of room sound or just a little bit of, an ambience that just makes it sound less direct.
Right.
I use plugins sometimes, even just like basic old deverb.
Yeah, deverb's totally useful.
I use it all the time for some of the really short settings, like in a high percentage mix standpoint. So it's like, maybe not all wet, but 70 or 80% wet on like an ambience that's really low, especially for like percussion and stuff, where I want it to sound like he wasn't 6 inches from the mic.
Right.
So if I can record it that way, that I prefer that. But
yeah, it's like a little bit of first reflection off the walls, what it sounds like, and it makes it sound like the mics just step back, or like the percussion step back a little bit, shakers.
Yeah, it just makes them a little bit easier to place, and so that's something to play with if you're struggling with.
Yeah, I just think that's a great reminder. It's like think about the music you're making and think about the positioning of these parts.
Yeah.
Some of those parts are meant to be up front. Some of them are meant to be back and accompanying. And as simple a move as that's how close or far you place the mic.
Yeah, sure.
Makes that difference,
Yeah, it's true.
And like a really slamming rock snare, in the same way that you probably don't want to stick your ear right up to it, you may want to have the mic that you're really favoring be the one that's back further where you would want to stand,
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
Yeah, it's true. There's a lot of things to play with like that. And I think that goes a little bit back to what we were talking about with bleed, like say acoustic guitars. I think part of what I really like about having 2 or 3 acoustic guitars in the same room with a little bit of bleed is that I still have that presence of a mic that's sort of right in front of him. But I also have a little bit of that reflection where he's in the mic that's 6 feet away.
Right.
So it's sort of like a best of both worlds. I don't have any control over it unless I mute one of the guitars.
Yeah.
But I feel like it ends up helping them sit in a space that's present. You're hearing it very directly, but it also feels like there's some depth, like they're in a real place and not just, coming out of the headphones.
Want to record killer drums in your home studio? Then check out Rockstars of Drums to learn how to record, edit, and mix pro-sounding drums with professional Nashville session drummer in a Grammy-winning studio. Or if you're ready to start mastering your own records at home, then check out Rockstars of Mastering, where I walk you through exactly how I mastered my own records skadoosh using nothing but plugins in PreSonus Studio One. And if mixing is your focus, then check out my free course Mixmaster Bundle, where I show you how to mix using stock and free plugins in Pro Tools. And the best part is these techniques would work for you in whichever DAW you're using right now. Plus, you get a look at how I recorded everything in my studio and multi-track downloads for you to practice mixing and even include in your mixing portfolio if you want. Are you ready to make your best record ever? Then go to Mixmaster Bundle to get started for free now, or look for the clickable link in the show notes of this episode. So now you've worked in a bunch of different studios. You have one now that you're dialing in to how you like it, but you've worked in other ones and you probably still do sometimes. What are the things that you pick up on right away when you start to move a mic away from a source and you're like, ooh, the sound of this isn't working, or the sound of this room? Like, what should the rock stars be thinking about as far as like how come in their home studio, when you put the mic 6 feet away, it sounds like crap instead of great? You know, is there stuff that you listen for or hear?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it depends on the volume of whatever it is that the source is. You know, it's like if you're recording something that's super quiet, as you get away from it, it isn't maybe going to sound any more interesting. It's just going to be quieter and sound like it was recorded poorly, which sometimes that's helpful, you know. But also noise and things like that, you know, like that's something even we deal with when we're putting acoustic guitars out in the kitchen. Sometimes you start to hear like the fridge, you know, or like road noise.
I just got a new fridge in there and it's louder than the old fridge.
But yeah. Well, and you know, if you're in a place with cars and stuff and, you know, not triple windows, it's like the further you get, the louder all that other ambience is going to be if a truck drives by or an ambulance or something.
I'm stealing 2 record label names from things you said. One is Ingenuine Records. I think that would be an interesting one. And the other one is Triple Windows.
Triple Windows
Records would be
We can
cool.
talk about it.
All right, cool. Vocals. Yola has a powerful, big voice. I guess you've already given us some insights into, you know, how you set so that it crunches just right in the just right place. What other thoughts go into vocals? And I want to ask you this question, because there are a lot of records you do that sound like they're this great meeting of this, you know, live performance, old school, but they still sound like they could totally sit right with modern records, you know, computer-made stuff on the radio. How useful and how important is vocal tuning as a post-production process?
Yeah, it sort of depends on the singer and the kind of record it is. We've been really fortunate to work with some singers who pretty much get it right by the time the band is right, to where if there's any tuning we need to do, it's like so subtle, you know, it's just little things here and there.
What are the tools that you find useful for tuning? I mean, Autotune and Melodyne, those are 2 obvious ones. Any preferences around those things?
I use Autotune more, just because the way it's integrated. Like I used Melodyne a long time ago when I was having to like tune a vocal start to finish because it wasn't sung well.
Right.
But I feel like at least the last time I was dealing with Melodyne, it's been a few years, it was much easier for me to just grab one little thing in Autotune in the context of Pro Tools, without making audio files that could get lost and, you know.
Sort of like in auto mode where you just let us do a thing, or do you do it by hand? Graphical?
I usually just do it auto suite, because usually if there, or
audio suite.
If there's usually just I'm grabbing like either a couple of notes or like one big note or something and just finessing it a little bit more.
Yeah, that's an interesting. So it's like it's easier to do a quick little fix. I mean, you could always, like if you print an audio suite version of it and then you play it and you don't like it, you just undo it and try it again with a little bit.
Or if I start grabbing things here and there, I'll just make a duplicate playlist so I've got the untuned version.
Yeah.
But like things like Pocket, I pretty much all do that like by hand with editing clips and nudging. I don't really do any of that in Autotune or Melodyne.
Yeah. So I don't either. I mean, I know that I've always been impressed with how you could move the timing of things in Melodyne, but by the time I take all the tracks out of Pro Tools over there and then bring them back, I don't trust that any of that timing
is legit.
So I'm just going to focus on the tuning, you know.
Well, and like, like with Dan's solo record, he was playing acoustic on pretty much the whole thing. So we sort of had a sound that the two were kind of like locked together.
Right.
It would have been difficult for me to do much tuning.
Yeah.
Because, they were isolated. I could turn the vocal or the acoustic up and down, but there was enough bleed where if we tuned something, you'd hear it because it would rub weird against the acoustic guitar.
Although that could be a cool effect sometimes.
It could be.
Sound like a pitch doubling kind of effect.
Or it sounds like, he's pulling off the mic or something.
Yeah. I remember tuning a vocal and then bringing it back in and playing it against the original and being like, oh, that's kind of a cool effect.
Yeah, it's almost like an ADR sort of.
Yeah. Any other thoughts about mic choice for powerful singers like Yola?
Again, not to beat a dead horse, but I use dynamic mics a lot. I've got an American SM7 that I really love. It's an old one, and I use that on her a good bit. We have an RCA KU3A. It's a cardioid ribbon mic. That's kind of dark, but breaks up really nice. We use that a lot on Marcus King.
That's the one that has the kind of slanted, angled top to it, right?
Yeah, I think it was originally like for scoring and stuff.
Yeah.
But I use those two a lot. We made a record on a country singer, and I used a U47 just because it seemed like it was the right choice for him. Yeah. But yeah, it's nothing super outside the box, I guess. We use a 67 occasionally, but...
Well, the cool thing about listening to the Dan Auerbach record that you did and Yola, and there were some others in there too, but the vocal sound is very warm, it's very upfront, it like really just stays put.
Yeah.
And it has just the right amount of fuzzy, kind of tonality. It's like you can touch it, you can feel the texture or something. And I loved it. And when I hear it, I'm like, man, that's so cool sounding. And it's great to be reminded, like, yeah, that's the sound of dynamics too.
Yeah.
We forget. I think as an engineer, sometimes you're like, oh, the SM7 is the first one SM57 is the first mic that you get that's useful in a lot of things. But it's when I can get an expensive mic, then that's when I'll get it. And
I'll always pick something more expensive.
Yeah, it's like, that's not the case,
Yeah. And I feel like, particularly with vocals, something Dan and I go back and forth about a lot is how bright versus loud they should be.
Right.
And that's something, I guess, not just with vocals, with other things too, but like, it's amazing if there's not a lot of real top end, you can get away with having it really loud.
Right.
And it never is like harsh or grating. It just is like a hug almost, And I feel like there's other stuff where that's true in both ways. Like sometimes, the bass guitar will seem like it's too loud, but it's really just too big, so we'll take out a little bit of bottom or, tambourine, half the time, instead of turning it up, we just brighten it in the right way and suddenly it sits better.
Right.
So finding that thing where, EQ and level sort of working hand in hand is really interesting.
Well, let's talk about the mixing process a little bit more. As far as monitoring and, what things help you make a decision about that amount of brightness or that volume or whatever. You've got these atomic 610s, which sound amazing. And that may be the beginning and end answer of that whole question. But what other things help you judge it and go like, oh, I got it right versus like, oh, I didn't notice that?
So this is, I guess, an answer to a couple of different questions. I have this little Panasonic boombox that I probably spend 70% of my time on when I'm mixing for a few reasons. One, I can always tell level things, except when it comes to like low end. But like snare, percussion, vocal, guitars, it's just the right amount of, I guess, consumer like shape. It's like I know where everything should be on there.
Right.
And I think maybe more importantly, it makes me listen at a fairly quiet volume, which enables me to work longer.
That's a big thing.
And it took me a while to realize that, because I had Proax that I love, and it would be fun to work at a certain volume, and like feel the music.
Yeah.
But I would be getting tired at like 4 o'clock, It's like, and to where I just couldn't make any decisions anymore. And when I started really leaning on the boombox, I realized like it'd be like 7, 8 o'clock, and I still feel like I'm making wise choices because my ears weren't nearly as tired.
Yep.
And so I guess that Panasonic boombox is a important part of my life. I have 3 of them now, just in case they.
And when breaking. 7 or 8 o'clock rolls around, are you almost done, or are you just getting rolling?
It kind of. I mean, I guess it depends on the day. But it's funny, even like when we're tracking, a lot of times I'll like flip down to there and just make sure that like I'm not super out of whack.
Yeah.
Because sometimes if my balance is all wrong, I might think something sounds right, even though it doesn't. When I correct the balance, it's like, oh, I got to fix this.
I have a tendency to still be pretty loud during the recording and tracking stages of things. It's easier for me to turn the speakers, like make a choice and then turn the speakers way down when I'm just engineering somebody else.
Yeah.
But boy, if I'm recording myself too, it's tricky to keep getting that volume down because you're just like always in a state of wanting to feel it.
And I feel like when I've got a room full of people, it's really hard to not like turn it way up just because it's more fun and they think it sounds better loud.
One of the things I like to do is I just keep my gun muffs up by the console. Because you're, as the engineer, you're like stuck in front of the speakers, you know? You're stuck in the loud zone.
Well, and I try to use the moments I can to get it down so that when the band comes in to hear it, I can turn it back up. You know, so it's like if they're out there working something out and I know that we're not about to make a take, I'll like check some things and make sure everything sounds good. And once I'm like, yeah, this is cool, I'll like turn it way down and even put it on a little boombox for a minute while they're figuring out chords and parts and stuff, so that when they finally get it and they come back in here, I haven't been listening loud for a half hour.
Yeah, exactly. I find that headphones can be really valuable in that situation too, because you could pop on your headphones, you can hear plenty of detail. You can hear that quiet voice that's saying like, hey man, can you do this thing, you know, and not miss it. But you can also keep them down at a much, much lower volume during the day.
And so at EZI, it's just a stereo mix. There's no more me's or anything, which to me is sort of like the best of all worlds because I feel like it's helpful for everybody to have headphones and be able to like not just hear what's happening right around them.
Right.
But it also makes everybody listen to the same thing. So they're all like engaged in the same track.
Right.
You know, you don't have one guy who's got like a totally different balance. And as a result, all the parts kind of like work together because everybody knows what's happening.
Yeah. I think it's a good reminder too that like if you're hearing something that's not working in the headphones as a musician, rather than just simply turning that person off in your mix and then like now you're not actually playing music together on the track. You pretty much only have one choice, which is like either deal with it or communicate and sort it out musically out on the floor. What are some things that, if you remember, that you feel like consistently need to be a little different for the headphones out in the control room, the 2 mix versus where you want to set it just listening out of the speakers in the control room?
I think it depends on the artist, because like with Yola, she's like a big, powerful singer, but the band doesn't necessarily need to hear a ton of it. They need to hear enough, you know? Whereas I would probably monitor a little bit more of her just because she's so much fun to listen to. Marcus King is a singer and a guitar player, and so if he's taking like solos and stuff, there's going to be enough of him to where everybody is sort of following his lead, you know, because he's sort of the band leader, even though he's not like playing all the chords. He's like playing more like licks and solos and stuff, but everybody needs to sort of chase him.
Yeah.
But, you know, it depends on the song.
Yeah.
And who's driving, you know. I feel like we'll do songs that are really based around like a Wurlitzer part or something. And like everybody's got to be able to hear that or they don't know where they're going.
Right, exactly. Yeah. I know as a musician, sometimes, you know, the vocals might need to be down a little bit more in your mix because you desperately need to hear the timing between these different instruments.
Sure.
And if the vocals are loud enough, you know, it's a tricky thing because the vocals being loud in the headphones can help everybody emote the song.
Yep.
But it can cover up some of the subtleties in the instrumentation.
Yeah.
Especially if the band's working out the song and like people are still missing that, we're playing the wrong notes together here.
Yeah. It's definitely a balance. And there's been times when, you know, we get the take and realize that some change we made in a bridge doesn't work against a melody, and it's like, man,
I never do that, man. I'm sorry that you guys have to struggle through that. I've never made that mistake.
That's always kind of humbling too, because if that happens, it means that the cue mix probably wasn't right. It's like I should be a little more dialed to making sure that it's great.
That is one of the benefits of having a trusted pair of ears in the control room. When somebody's producing, or a great engineer like yourself, who's like, everybody out there is giving their best on the floor to play the music, but having somebody who's like got your back and a pair of speakers and picking up on the things that you guys are missing, that's so valuable. Let's cut to our closing questions here.
Sure.
One of the last ones I want to ask you about that recording process, though, is give us some closing comments on mix. Like, is there anything mix-wise set up, or something that happens to the stereo bus that is kind of a favorite go-to for you, or any useful stuff you've been looking at?
I do it a little bit differently when I'm mixing apart from Easy Eye, because I mix through a PM1000 on my own, and I sort of set it up a little bit differently because
is that the Yamaha console?
Yeah, it's modded
like 70s thing or something.
Yeah, it's really cool. I've mixed a few things on it recently, and it's like, man, this thing's got some mojo to it. But one thing that I do, no matter where I'm at, is pretty early on, I sort of build a little bit of a compression chain in my mix bus, however I'm mixing, to where I'm monitoring sort of that bus compression pretty early.
Right.
So that as I'm doing things, I'm sort of doing it into that.
Right.
And the one thing that I've really fallen in love with the past few years is using analog reverbs as I can, even if like all of my real processing is happening in the box, whether I'm at Easy Eye or at my place. I'm really just summing through the console, but I'm using analog reverb either place. I feel like that just really helps.
That answers the question I didn't ask, is about all those great reverbs you had on all those records.
No, at Dan's we have Chip's Moman's original echo plate that was like on like the Elvis in Memphis and all that stuff.
Wow. And I noticed you do some really tasteful use of pre-delay on the plate too.
Yeah,
especially
we do some
in the
Yoli.
Or Yola, excuse me.
Yeah, we do some of that, and we'll do like some weird stuff where we'll put like modulation on like a return, like whether it's like a tremolo or on Shannon Shaw's record, which I don't know if that's in the playlist. There's a track that we did, if you're into like weird reverbs, called Freddy's and Teddy's. And it's a song, it's Richard Swift is playing drums, who is like one of the, I think, the greatest drummers in the last 50 years. He's the coolest feel ever.
Nice.
I miss that guy. But it's him and Dan and Shannon, and there's some really cool reverb effects where it's a real plate that we put some tremolo on. It's kind of swells in spots. It's fun one to check out.
Nice. Yeah, it's fun to play around with that stuff.
Yeah.
And there is something beautiful about real reverbs. They make it really easy to like what you're hearing back.
Yeah. Between the AKG springs, and I've got a stereo spring at the house. I use a Benson. That's really cool.
Oh, yeah.
And the plates at Dan's, I feel like it, I don't know, it's just helpful to get enough without it being too much, and it just takes up the right amount of room.
I got a master room spring reverb right there.
We have one of those. They're incredible. Yeah, they sound really good.
And an echo plate too upstairs in the closet.
Yeah. I've bid on a few echo plates and haven't won any of them.
Both of those I like a lot. I have to confess that I've been using less and less of them because I'm just discovering so many much better sounding, not better than the real thing, but better than previous plug-in versions now in the computer, and it's easy to
getting better.
Use those.
And I use a lot of that stuff. I use a lot of in-the-box reverbs too, but I feel like even just having a couple here and there just help me create a little bit of dimension.
Now, if you're using all this out of the computer stuff to make music, what tips do you have for recall and how you do that?
My tip is to not touch anything ever.
Just don't change it.
I don't. I have at the house, it's a PM1000 that sort of stays. The faders are all calibrated, and I'm using sends in the box that go to the springs and then come back into the box. So anything I want to do from like a pre-delay standpoint, or like if I want to EQ it a little bit differently, I'll just do it with plugins in the box.
And do you print that reverb back into the session?
I try to. I don't always remember to.
Right, totally.
And then at Easy Eye, we have 3 different plates that we use actively and a spring. And so it's really easy to sort of just pick, which one is the right feel.
And it gets recorded at the time or something like that. Yeah.
So
cool, man. All right. Well, so a couple of closing questions. And we can do these quickly, but like when you started out in recording, what do you feel like was holding you back?
I think maybe not holding back, but one of the things that was difficult was figuring out how to balance my time between like assisting and trying to first on records where maybe I wasn't really making much money. I feel like that was a delicate balance, where it's hard to ever feel like you're making the greatest choice because you're giving up something either way.
Yep, totally. But making choices is important.
Yeah,
it's the act of making those choices and committing to something that will make things better in the end, for sure. How about some of the best advice you remember receiving?
Ben Fowler, never over-engineer.
Never over-engineer. There it is again. Good one.
Never get in the way of the music part.
We talked a little bit before this about one of the mastering engineers that you've been working with is Richard Dodd.
Yeah.
And that was his advice when he was on the podcast, was talking about like learning to get out of the way of the music as an engineer.
No, he's really great. And I've had fun working with him recently. He's incredible.
Well, hearing your records and seeing his credit on there inspired me to immediately text Richard and invite him back on the show. So
that's great.
Hopefully we'll have him on soon. Do you have another recording tip, hack, or secret sauce, something you want to share with the rock stars that they could use on their next session today?
Don't be afraid to listen quiet. I mean, that's like really anticlimactic, but it's amazing how much more effective I feel like you can be when you're mixing at a reasonable volume.
Yeah, don't rock out, rock stars.
I mean, there's a time and place for it, It's like, and it should be fun. So like sometimes you just need to crank it up and enjoy what you're working on. But I feel like when you got a lot of work to do, like, because there's, sometimes you're having fun with it, and other times it's like, all right, I really got to like make some headway on some of this stuff. I feel like when I turn it down a little bit, I can be like the most productive that I can be.
I find that useful. Like on this recent session, for example, you're rocking out so much to make the music in that moment where the tracking's happening or whatever, and then you come in and maybe you listen back and you're like, you crank it because you want to feel if you got the feel of the take or whatever. But in that moment of making the rough mix, I love to turn it way down quiet, let everybody talk in the control room,
see what you hear,
and put it in mono on the little speaker, and then just sit there and just balance. It's like, it's such a break for my ears. I already made all the decisions about what it sounds like.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna change the total EQ of something like that. I'm just gonna balance stuff, and it can be so effective.
I've also gotten to where I listen on my phone a lot, like through the speaker.
I do that a ton,
and here's why: not because I think people are really consuming that much music that way. They might be, but so many of my friends, they hear about people, or their first sort of introduction to an artist's new record is on like Instagram or something.
Right.
Somebody posts a music video on Instagram. You're not like, oh wait, hang on, let me go get my headphones. Even if you're a person who has a vinyl collection, it's like if you're just on your phone while you're waiting at the airport, you're probably just gonna like hear it through the speaker. Yeah. So I feel like in a weird way that's kind of important now.
Yeah.
To make sure that something sounds balanced there.
I think it's funny, but I think Instagram sounds pretty good. They've got like
it doesn't sound bad.
Sound.
Yeah.
I mean, like a loudness algorithm in there that like whatever you print, whatever little video you make, you're like, damn, that sounds good.
Yeah.
You just go like shoot a little video of your speaker with the drum solid for a second. Yeah. You're like, I need to get that in on the track right there.
How do I import that?
Any exciting hardware tool or something that's pretty fun to have in the studio?
I think my newest exciting toy is the Pi compressors.
Oh,
I got those over the summer. They're just like, I used them. We just finished a record, and I used them on the mix bus, which is like a terrible idea. They're not that balanced left and right. I mean, they're not matched, but it works. And it was like a cool mojo, just something like different and a little bit, out of the box. Try something new.
I like that. All right. And then Rockstars, if you want to check those out, I think Waves has had a plug-in version around for a long time.
Yeah, I think on Waves, they're called like the Kramer.
Yeah, the Kramer Pi.
P-I-E, but the real ones are P-Y-E.
Okay, all right, that's right.
So I know there's some on the internet out there, and they're cool.
And then I guess that next question would be software tool, but maybe that's one is just go check out some good plugins. But do you have anything that you've been excited about checking out recently?
The Capital Chambers plugin I've been way into.
Yeah. All right, dig it.
If you don't know about the FabFilter stuff, I feel like everybody knows about it now, but I use that stuff all the time just because it's so easy.
It is very versatile. I really like having the RTA frequency response chart while you're working.
To get on a little FabFilter nerd thing, the multiband compressor, if you go into Expert, I've started using that a bunch recently where you can make the detection band separate from what you're actually compressing. You can, if you click on that little Expert button, there's so
you can detect a mid-range thing but compress the low end.
Yeah, so I've been using that a bunch with like a mono drum sound, let's say, where it's like a little, like not quite enough top end on the snare, but you don't really want to like turn up all this click of the kick.
Yeah,
you can make it to where it's it is expanding a certain frequency on the top end based on something that's really focused that maybe only the snare is hitting.
Oh, very cool.
If you've got that multi-band, go play with it. It's super cool.
All right, dude, that's a great tip, man. Awesome takeaway. Let's go to our closing question here. We're going to, this hypothetical, you're going to take the Wayback Machine. You're going to go find young Alan desperately practicing his percussion parts and say, look, dude, I know you really want to be a rock star of the recording studio yourself one day. Here's the single most important thing you need to know. What advice would you go back and give yourself if you could?
If you've got to do it, then don't quit. Because there were several times when I was like months away, where I'm thinking like, all right, if by the summer it's not happening, like maybe I'll just go back to school in the fall and go do something else, But if you really got to do it, then just keep going. And there's a little bit of a war of attrition sometimes where it might take a while. And if you don't have to do it as a job, there's nothing wrong with doing it for fun. I've had several friends who have left and they still record all the time and they love it. And it's not stressful because it's for fun. And that's cool too. That's not a bad thing. Music is, can be important whether it's your job or not. So
nice. Well, it's a good reminder. Like persistence is probably one of the greatest skill sets we can have for doing this.
It's got to be, even whether it's, within trying to get a take or, the years it takes to have any sort of success. It spans the whole breadth of the.
Hopefully when you look at the trajectory of your lifelong career, each take is getting better rather than wishing you had just stuck with the first take.
Well, yeah, I think it's been a good few years. I'm very thankful to.
Yeah, me too, man. I love it.
Work on stuff.
I'm thankful you're making records.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
I'm thankful you brought these amazing records.
Well,
and thank you for joining us on the show, dude.
Thanks for having me.
It's awesome to meet you and awesome to have you here.
Yeah, thank you.
So much cool stuff. Let the rock stars know how they can find you online. Where can they go learn more about you?
I'm on Instagram, Allen Parker, ALLENPARKER. My website's mallenparker.com. And also check out Easy Eye Sound. All those records on that website I was proudly involved in. And they're cool. I feel like Dan and I are in a cool rhythm where there's this sort of balance of each record has its own thing, but there's definitely a thread that I feel like people who love music tend to like a lot of our different records.
Well, just looking at the records, that you brought, they just look like they go together, and it's really quite inspiring and beautiful. And I know we're out of time, so we didn't really get into the questions of like how do you make this work? But maybe that'll be another one next time. Talk about like what it means to be creating a record label and a collection of vinyl stuff. Thanks so much for joining us on the show. Rockstars, you'll find links to what we talk about in the show notes. Just click through, go listen to Alan's playlist of music there, and we'll see you around in the next episode.
Sounds good.
Cheers, man. Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. And if you want more free content from Recording Studio Rockstars, all you have to do is go to rsrockstars.com/email. Again, that's rsrockstars.com/email to enter your name and email, and I'll keep you in the loop with articles, videos, podcast updates, and even free gear giveaways for your studio. Just look for the link in the show notes below. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music. Thanks so much for listening to this episode, Rockstars. I also want to give a big thank you to our sponsors who helped make this episode possible: OWC, Whisper Room, Eventide Audio, Spectra 1964, and Roswell Pro Audio. You'll find links to all these wonderful sponsors in our show notes. These are all things that I highly recommend you check out for your studio. They're going to help you make your best record ever. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you guys in the next episode. Cheers.